Blah blah. Oh. Hello, my beautiful audience. How the hell are you guys doing? I am certainly excited today to be talking about the film that is going to be an interesting one today. I have here today a friend of mine all the way from the 1980s. His name is Troy. His name is Troy Faubert. How you doing, buddy?
Oh, I am doing very well, Cody. Thank you for having me on your show. I've been so excited for this. Like I've been waiting my entire life for this.
Oh, it's beautiful. Awesome.
I'm so excited. I just can't hide it.
So I don't know if you know this, Troy. So in the other So to Speak podcast, there's like this sort of running joke that I have an alter ego named Corey from the 80s because my kind of nickname on the show sometimes is Cody from the 90s. And I always referred to Corey from the 80s as like a cynic that like always likes to preach how the 1980s was the best thing ever. But I've kind of run that joke a little bit to the ground, and I always say like that person is just a myth. But I have you here. You are a cynic from the 1980s, so it's kind of perfect.
I might as well be. Yeah.
I didn't know if I based
I'm
that off of you, but
I'm
it's
I'm
perfect.
like, I think everything 80s is awesome. You know what? I like a lot of 90s and 2000s stuff now, recently. So I've kind of branched off from that, but I usually had the mentality where it's like everything 80s is awesome and everything else sucks.
Well, tell me very just generally, what is it about the 1980s that gravitates to you so much?
It's a very big question, Cody. I'd say it was a very colorful time, I'd say, in culture, just computers and all kinds of tech were just at their absolute height in the 80s. You had your computers that were becoming big, just all sorts of gadgets. The music was very like experimental. You had a lot of like well, a lot of synths, obviously. It was just like I think the fashions were really cool. I just felt like the movies had like I love the practical effects that were used in the 80s films. That was a real golden decade for practical effects in movies. And just, I think it's just the old, sometimes you can't really describe something entirely.
Yeah.
It kind of makes more sense in your head, but it's like for me, I'm like there's just something so damn visually appealing about everything 80s. I just like the crazy hairstyles, the really ridiculous but really colorful kind of like fashion, and it's just like it's not the. I just feel like in comparison, everything else today's just feels very dry. Like
So you find that the 80s is a bit of like a celebration of excess.
yeah, yeah. Well, and also that decade really did glorify rich and fame quite a bit. Like holy crap, like everyone wanted
Yeah.
to be rich.
True, very true. There's a really great documentary. It's on Disney Plus. It's called the 1980s, or it's something I forget the exact title. They have one for the 90s and the one for the 2000s. They called the 90s like the last great decade question mark, and then they called the 2000s the decade that changed us all. But I'm forgetting the name, the full name for the one for the 80s, but it's like a 4 hour documentary just going through all the broad strokes of everything that went on
Mm.
during that time, politically, nationally, fashion, pop culture wise. It's kind of a great celebration of it.
Okay. You know what? It's just one of those things where it just visually or aesthetically and everything from that decade just appeals to me. It just checks everything off the list that I like from just anything in general.
Well, no, I can definitely. I don't relate. I mean, I like I've said, I really gravitate towards how lifestyle was like back in the 90s, just because things were a lot more interesting and kind of off kilter, and that's definitely shown in a lot of like wacky and zany stuff that you can look back on the 90s, like those haircuts, the plaid, just the sort of like
Oh yeah, yeah.
everything was really just a reflection of what society was back then, and The 80s definitely has that sort of appeal to it. I'm actually a really big fan of the cinema that the 80s went through, where, it went from like that era in the 70s with the director's era of just trying to experiment and try to have filmmakers do other things. And then
Yeah,
the 80s kind of just felt like this celebration of just like going out to the cinema and having a good time. If it's like an adventure movie or a comedy, everything was just so
yeah,
general,
because like
you know?
I don't want to insult anyone that's big into the '70s cinema. I like '70s cinema. I like a lot. I mean, I like our decades besides the '80s, obviously, but '70s was kind of ugly. I felt '70s. I feel like a lot of things in the '70s got ugly. The music was ugly at times. I feel like you got into the later half of that decade, and that's where you start to see like the disco, which became electronic and everything, and that eventually you saw that lead up into what became the '80s. But
Well, yeah. Well, the 60s was definitely cleaning itself up after the war, and the 70s was definitely probably what you just said, how you felt it was a bit drab and
well,
ugly.
I think
I
because
think that was,
like there was the whole Vietnam thing was going on in the United States, and I feel like
yeah.
after that, you got a lot of really dumb music that was just supposed to like make you feel good or make you feel happy and whatever and make you dance, and it was just a lot of very lame stuff that
Well,
came
that's
out.
where punk music came from. It was a response to, they're like, I don't like my parents' music of them just getting on the dance floor and listening to disco.
Yeah, it's fucking crap,
Let's get into our fucking garages and start jamming out aggressively. And then, Lord and behold, punk music was made.
more or less.
There's definitely more to it than that,
Yeah, yeah,
obviously.
but that's a
But
whole other discussion, really. So,
yeah, you're not the type of person that thinks that MTV killed music, do you?
like MTV killed radio, I guess. Yeah, but I mean,
Well, no, I was saying because MTV is pretty divisive. The more I got older, and I started to realize that people just hated how it kind of. You're talking old school people of just saying like you just need to sit back and throw on some headphones with your vinyl and just listen to music with your eyes closed. And music videos felt like a bit of a contradiction to a lot of people when I would argue and say it introduced people to a lot of music.
oh yeah, no, it definitely eases you into music. I feel like I'm like when you try to show someone a song or songs they never heard, sometimes it's hard to sit still. When you got visuals to complement that music, it really does make a difference. I'm like,
Oh,
there's a
absolutely.
lot of great songs I discovered where I'm like, you know what, I would never discovered it if I wasn't for that music video. Uh,
For sure.
well, no, because sometimes you listen to a bit of the beginning of the song, and you kind of like you're like, oh, it's not catching my attention, and you kind of just switch to another song. But when
Yeah.
it's a music video, the music video, if there's a really good striking image or something that's visually appealing, before you even give up on the song, the music video has at least got you in its grasp, and then
Of
you'll
course,
give the
yeah.
song more of a chance, and then you'll find that you gave that song more of a chance because of that video than you ever would have just hearing it on the radio or some friend trying to tell you that this is some good shit when you don't really care.
Yeah. Story of all of our lives.
Yeah.
No matter what happens when it comes to music videos, it can be a song that I've heard so many times, and then the second I actually just tune in on the music video, I can just watch it once and I'll always remember it.
Hmm.
Like years later, I can be like, oh my God, I still remember the way they shot it, the way it was lit, and what was happening in the video. Obviously, music videos are a lot shorter, but there's something about even when a song gets thrown on the radio and I've heard it so many times, I can be like, wow, it's been 8 years since I've seen that music video, but I still remember it as if it was yesterday.
Yeah, whenever I hear any like song from like the early 2000s or late 90s, I just even if I don't remember the music video super well, I can already picture it's like okay, it's got a lot of like bright exposure
Yep,
because the videos were they were so much like they were so overexposed. I don't know. I guess having blown out whites was a really good visual flair.
well,
Just
it's also a time capsule. Like
yeah,
every sort of piece of medium is like a nice time
you
capsule.
had your
That's
trends in lighting and composition and everything in every decade.
maybe I need to have you back on the show so we can duel it out see what are better aspects from the 80s and the 90s and see which one wins the whole tournament. That should be
Well,
interesting.
perhaps, but you know what? I've been more fond towards the '90s stuff actually lately. I had this is a very Canadian thing, but they you know those compilations, Big Shiny Tunes,
Yes.
for Much Music. Yeah, so I the first one I ever got when I was a kid, it was like number six, but that was like 2001 by that point. I went back even further into when the first compilation came out in 1996, I believe, and been listening to a bunch of this. I actually downloaded all of those compilations because I'm like, you know, you kind of miss the idea. The compilations aren't really a thing anymore, you know, but you just remember like back in the day where it's like, hey, if you like want a whole thing of all these songs you like, but you don't want to have to buy the actual whole album just to listen to that one song, and all this other freaking crap that you don't care about. It's like,
Yeah.
hey, it's all in one CD, 18 tracks from all these artists, you know, and it's a bygone thing now. But you know what? Revisiting those has been really good, especially to get me into those certain years in 90s music. I mean, you're going to have a bit of this, the mix of the commercial stuff and sort of the indie kind of stuff, but more or less, it's a really good compilations are a really good gateway to get you exposure to what was popular in that one year, you know. So that's been fun for me. I've been into the '90s rock stuff, you know.
Yay, you're growing up.
Yeah, I'm growing up, or I'm growing more like you, I guess. Because except I don't know. I think some of the grungy stuff is still kind of crap.
Oh, okay, you just broke my heart.
Yeah, well, hearts are meant to be broken. If I want to be cynical, you know, but
Back to that, yeah. Well, speaking of the 1980s, let's talk about a film that everybody loves, everybody knows about, and it's one of the most cherished films from 1986. And of course, I'm talking about My Chauffeur. Oh, what? What the fuck is this movie? Oh,
you know what? I'll tell you, I'm because I'm a big '80s guy, which I don't know if you know that from what I've been saying for the last 10 minutes or whatever. I usually am very good digging into like a lot of the obscure movies in the '80s. I feel like I can list off like 100 movies that you've never even heard of from that decade. But
oh, I don't, I would believe you.
and
I,
I've been fairly
I
good.
don't doubt you.
I've been fairly good at seeking those out for many years, and even My Chauffeur was something that went right under the radar for me. I'm surprised this was not something I discovered offhand. It was something you actually brought to my attention. And
Yes. But well, before we get into that, let's just kind of give our listeners a bit of context on what this is, and then we'll get into our history behind it. So, My Chauffeur is a 1986 sex comedy that stars Deborah Foreman and Sam J. Jones, Flash Gordon himself.
yeah,
And essentially, the log line is a woman named Casey Meadows, played by Deborah Foreman, very mysteriously gets a job invitation to this limousine company called Brentwood Limousine to drive a bunch of rich people around. And that's kind of it. Like, on the way, she meets a lot of colorful characters, and her job is somewhat on the line, even though she's a very spunky and energetic type of person. Yeah, that's kind of it.
you know what? I was thinking because I knew when we were gonna have this discussion, we were gonna talk about the characters. But when I was thinking of like what words I'd use to describe Deborah Foreman in this movie, I actually thought of the words spunky and energetic, and you just said them right now. So I'm like, oh my god. Yeah, from what you've told me, or from what I know, you have more history behind this movie than I do because you were shown this to me many years later. But what is you want to tell me a little bit about how you came across a movie like this that was so obscure? It's like
Yeah, so back then, my mom and my uncle used to tape a lot of movies on VHS, and it used to be, oh shit, I'm about to put them in jail. I shouldn't have said
how
that.
dare you
True.
steal my chauffeur? No one
True,
no one's gonna
true.
go after you for that.
But I remembered on one VHS there was Tommy Boy and Ferris Bueller's Day Off. And of course, I watched those a lot, and Ferris Bueller ends later on would be like one of my all-time favorites. But there was one
Hmm.
film that was before these two on this cassette, and that was My Chauffeur. Anytime I'd rewind the movies, these two films, like Tommy Boy, like I'm trying to get to like the beginning of Tommy Boy to watch it. Oh, I'll just catch snippets at the end of My Chauffeur. Like, I press play, and then all of a sudden there's Penn and Teller in the back of a limousine with hookers. Like
Yeah, and you're
naked
like, what the what?
hookers.
You're like, what the hell is this movie?
And at that age, I don't see that much nudity in movies. It felt really enticing and like, what the fuck is
It is
this? Like, and
enticing.
it's trashy looking too. It looks very like it definitely was out of my comfort zone. So eventually my curiosity just sort of stepped in and I'm like, I'm just gonna sneak and watch this movie. And my first thoughts on it were like, it's so drenched in the 1980s. And as time goes by, it just gets more and more dated. The older I get, the more it's actually grown to be such a fascinating little time capsule of that time. But to its credit, there's a couple of funny scenes in it.
Yeah,
Like my favorite scene is probably so Sam Jones, he plays like this kind of like rich asshole type, and then he gets broken up by I guess his wife or his girlfriend after she said, "I'm pregnant with somebody else. Bye bye."
yeah,
And Casey Meadows is driving him around, and then eventually she pulls over, going like, "I don't know where else to take you. Like, do you want to just sit here?" He goes, "Yeah." And then she offers him a drink in the bar, and he gets so fucking drunk, and he said that he never even drinks, and he says probably like the funniest line in the movie of, "She was a fucking bitch. I never liked her anyway. She smells funny." I love it. And he gets so drunk and he's so happy that he's single. He jumps out of the limo, strips down, and he starts like running all over the park. And it's set to like this song by the Replacements. I think the song's called "Tommy Gets His Tonsils Out" or something like that.
yeah. It's some
Um,
kind of rock new wave song.
or it's like a hard rock punk song or something like that. It's
Yeah,
really aggressive, yeah. But and it's just hilarious to see this guy like grab a baby carriage and just like run around the park with
yeah, and then
it.
and he goes up to a gay couple and they kind of like scooch over on the bench and they're like, oh, hello
They're like,
there.
yeah, they're like, oh, hello. They're
and
not even
and then and
distressed.
then and then there's then there's these three old ladies in the bench are just like eating popcorn. It cuts them eating popcorn while watching Sam Jones just run around naked because they're like that's a nice piece of ass.
It's great. It's wonderful. But tell me, what is your introduction to My Chauffeur?
Okay, well, my introduction to it was from you. You kept on. You probably told me this several times about how this was on a VHS tape that your mom taped off TV, and you just said, it's like because I know you had always had a habit back then of trying to upsell me in a lot of movies. In a lot of cases, you actually overhyped them, and I was just like, what the? I was like, what the hell was it? Like, what was so great about that? I'm like, why'd you show me that? That movie wasn't that
Like
great,
I
but
still do have that tendency that I'm trying to suppress, but
yeah,
I just get so excited.
yeah, you ruined
I'm
you
sorry.
ruined movies for me a
Well,
lot
I'm
sometimes.
sorry.
But no, it was one of those movies that you were like very earnest about. You were like, listen, like it's not that great of a movie, but it's charming in some very odd kind of way that you couldn't really
Yes.
quite describe, and you're like, you just gotta see it for yourself, Troy. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt, I guess. And this was a very hard movie to find for many years back then. Even when I say back then, when we watched this for the first time, I want to say that was about 10 years ago when we were like at the tail end of high school. And
Yeah.
but yeah, it wasn't easy to find good copy, and I'm thankful for this generation of the Blu-rays. A lot of companies are coming out and putting out all these obscure movies on Blu-ray. Like I feel like even if you wanted to try and get an official copy back then, it would have been like DVD would have been probably obscure. You might have had to import it. It might have been like something like it's only released in the UK and it was not released over here, and you'd have to make sure it's region free or whatever. So I am thankful that it's more accessible these days. But oh my god, it was a pain in the butt trying to find a good copy for us to watch. But
It was.
we
Yeah.
we pulled it off, and I thought, and you know what, I'll say the first time I was like I had a little fun with it, but I was also like I didn't know what to think really. Like I didn't nothing I wasn't really prepared or even really there was nothing that really could prepare me for what kind of movie this would be because it is in some ways typical of its time, but it in other ways it really isn't. It's kind of its own thing if we can go into that.
What was your favorite scene in the movie if you have one?
Um, well, I do like the when Casey Meadows her first client she has to drive is this punk rocker guy.
Cat fight.
Cat fight. I'm like that can't be a real. I thought you said Cat McPat fight. So it still sounds stupid either way. But yeah, you know he has to get this guy out of the whatever his motel room, and he keeps like saying fuck off, or you know, it keeps treating her like one of the groupies that in bed with him, being like, oh, why don't you take your clothes off and jump in here too, and which yeah, that this is where it's. I'll say a lot of this movie is very it's somewhat misogynist and sexist.
Very misogynist.
Very
So
okay, yeah, I won't state that it is. But anyway, so he finally gets this guy in the freaking limousine, and they're talking about this stupid game they're playing where it's like, yeah, you get certain points for finding a certain person with something, and they fought this lady in the park. Who was like in this blue dress, is like walking her dog, and they're like, "Oh, she's worth 20,000 points." You know, she's wearing a blue dress. She's probably got the blue underwear or whatever, and they're like, okay. So they go into the park and they try they harass this woman, and she starts. You just think it's just gonna be a thing where she just like screams, "Oh no!" and then they just rip her underwear off or whatever. But she fucking picks up her dog and swings it around, and I'm like, what? It's so zany and stupid. Like I'm like, I didn't expect it to go there, and
you don't know which person is like supposed to be the real person in this scene. Like you're just like this feels out of its world. Like I can't relate to
well,
what's
this was
happening.
the very
It's
first
so
moment. Like this was near the beginning of the movie, but this was like the first moment I knew that this movie. I almost didn't really know what this movie was because I should talk about the beginning. The beginning of this movie is very odd. The very first 5 minutes, you know, you
yeah.
got this guy in a suit or whatever. You got this people in this rich kind of like how you describe it? They're in this ritzy house, you know, and you got this guy that's like delivering a letter or whatever, and everything.
Yeah.
And there's this to you know this someone at the restaurant, which ends up being Casey, but during this whole 5 minutes in the opening credits, there's this very somber kind of like classical violin music that's
It's sleepy. It
it's very
automatically
sleepy.
it's
Yeah, and
it's almost like it's almost like a soap opera or something like that where you're like am I watching like a boring drama
it
that
sounds like
really
it
isn't.
feels like a drama. I'm like, you know what? I'm like, if it wasn't for I guess the credits having a somewhat funky font, like you cannot tell off the bat that this is a comedy. Like it does not set up that way. But you know, then Deborah Foreman and you know enters the scene, and she's like, oh yeah, I got you know, it's like I was invited to come here to work for this limo company, and you know you got
Because she wants to drive the big black limousines. Woo!
oh yeah. So you could tell she's like yeah she's energetic and spunky right off the bat. I will say like I feel like because like the very first joke in this movie is when she walks in and there's that guy that's holding the cup of coffee and knocks and then she knocks him the coffee over. But here's what I find funny. This is the first visual gag in the movie, and I noticed that the guy tilts his cup and spills the coffee before she actually bumps into him. So it's a very badly timed joke. Like, or it's a very badly
Oh.
timed visual gag. Like, it's supposed to make it look like, oops, she made him spill his coffee by bumping into him, but he spilled his coffee down his pants before she even bumped into him. So,
And then she's trying to wipe it up and she's not paying attention and it looks like he's like masturbating him and
yeah,
he's
the
like,
one guy
"Oh."
is like, it's like, you know, it's like, excuse me, you could just stop masturbating him, and then he like, and you know, and then he's that guy like he's like a little old guy, and he's got like a grin on his face, and gives like a kiss face, and then Casey Meadows responds back with a kiss face too, and I'm like, oh my god, she's adorable.
Oh no, Deborah Foreman kills it in this movie. She's actually surprisingly charismatic for the with the material that she's given.
She's charismatic, bubbly, and fun. Like
She's the one that looks like she's having the most fun, and in fact, she would later on to say like this is her favorite film out of all the ones she's been in because she had the most fun doing it.
Oh really? She's been in other films.
Well, she was in that movie. I don't know if you've seen it. It's called April Fool's Day. It's like
Oh,
a it's like a slasher kind of movie
I
where you're
I
like, oh,
seen
is this a
that.
joke or is it not? Like,
Wait,
yeah,
well, okay. I've seen that movie. That movie completely falls flat for me because because at the beginning of the movie they keep referencing that, oh, it's April Fool's Day is coming up. Oh, by the way, going on this trip to this island that my aunt or mom owns, a grandmother owns, and with the friends.
yeah,
And then everyone starts and everyone, like, people start the friends start dying. But I'm like, well, since they kept them repeating the April Fools at the beginning, could it be that all these deaths are all fake? And then they revealed at the end, like, April Fools, and I'm like, I fucking knew this was all fake the entire time. Like, how about, like, you should have kept that part hidden in the beginning of the movie, and then,
yeah.
or could have, like, made a very subtle reference, but it just felt like they kind of hit you in the head with the frying pan before they could even try and pull this twist on you, and it's just like, wow, I went for this entire movie not surprised at all.
She was also in the original Valley Girl with Nick Cage.
Oh my god! So okay, so I've seen. So now, okay, now you're telling me that I've seen these movies with Deborah Foreman, but I just didn't know that she was Deborah Foreman. Cause
I don't think she was the lead, but like this is the
oh
one
wait, yeah, no,
where
she's definitely wasn't the lead. You're right. I seen Valley Girl though. That's you know what? That's a fun movie. I actually
I haven't seen it yet.
I'd say watch it. It's of its time very much. It's 1983, and it's got a good soundtrack too. I mean, I think there's that song "I Melt with You" by Modern English. Everyone knows that song. I start this world and melt with you. Wait,
Yep.
that's that movie actually, because that song was very underground, and that movie kind of put that song on the map, kind of.
Oh, cool.
So, so Deborah Foreman was in More Than the Chauffeur. We've confirmed that. Okay, thank you. Um,
Thank you and good night.
well, well, but yeah, no. They really establish her right off the bat in the movie that she's like this. She's kind of. You could just tell she's the kind of person that doesn't, makes the best of every situation. Doesn't let anything get her down. Like you feel like you're like this is like she's such a positive person.
And that opening scene is just followed up by so many other scenes where anytime you cut to the gentlemen that work at the Brentwood limousine, it's just so boring and not even worth talking about. And it's almost like I get what they're trying to do with the contrast of like the outside world of LA and their company, but it doesn't quite work.
Yeah, you got like all these like old blokes from some of them sound they're talking like they came over from England or Europe or whatever, and they're just
Yeah.
like and they're like that old generation, and then they work for this limousine company is all like probably been like been around for 50 years or something or 60 years, and we uphold tradition and everything's kind of conservative in some way. Those parts when it cuts like all the old men just sitting in their room talking and everything, it does feel like I'm like it seems like this where I'm like, okay, you get all these spunky scenes and cute scenes with Deborah Foreman and with Sam Jones and whatever, like that borders on kind of like romantic
Yeah.
comedy, and then you get these air scenes that seem like they're like it feels like you're watching like grumpy old men or something really like that's not meant for like the teen audience that I'm assuming this movie's going for. It's tonally odd, and it's also like it's never like I'm never 100% sure who this movie is aimed at, because it's just like it feels like it feels a little bit cobbled together. Like it feels like it's a bit all over the place in tone.
Well, here's the biggest problem with the film. There are no stakes.
Oh hell no, there's no
There's
stakes.
there's nothing. That's what's kind of the frustrating thing is that okay, if she's a young girl that's trying to keep her job at this place that is already established to be very sexist, very uptight gentlemen that are like women are not allowed to drive limousines. If she was able to like swindle her way in and she's trying to make an impression, And the movie kind of has like this three strikes you're out kind of situation where, like in the scene you were just talking about with when he was picking up the cat fight, the rock star guy, she gets like a lot of complaints from people around town, the fact that like he did that horrible thing in the park to the woman in the underwear and all that. And then in that other scene that I was talking about where Battle, played by Sam Jones, was just running around nude. And then the third strike she got was the scene at the end with Penn and Teller, where Penn plays like a con man who like kidnaps like Teller, who plays a very racially insensitive
He's a Egyptian ambassador.
an Egyptian ambassador. It's very racially insensitive, and Casey just believes this guy saying that I'm his bodyguard. I'm just like, look at the guy.
He
Does he?
like
He does not look.
yeah, he's got these sunglasses on. He's got this green milk green jacket on. It's got like pins like the Clash, and all these punk bands on it. And like this guy looks like he belongs in like some seedy part of L.A. Strip.
And then she has no reaction the whole time while driving. She just looks in the rearview mirror like, "Oh, that's kind of strange," but like does nothing about it. It's like your job is kind of on the line right now. Like,
Because she doesn't overthink anything. She tends to not overthink about anything. She kind of just like goes with the flow and has fun with whatever. I mean, I feel like a part of her wants to have fun, anyways. But I feel like I root for Deborah Foreman because she's like the antithesis of just conform. She's the anti-conformity. She just
for
does whatever
sure.
the fuck she wants, and I champion that. I'm like, okay, maybe in the context of the movie, she's not sympathetic, but just as a character in general, because like she makes this film. Like if she wasn't,
Oh, for sure. She has a lot of energy. She has a lot of wit to her. I just feel like she should just try to like have a way to like ease around to keep having her job intact because I mean, you know what I mean? Kind of like how like, a troubled kid that is trying to like, justify what their like juvenile actions were like and the parents are like really over or, are really hovering over them and they have like kind of cute and clever little remarks that kind of let them off easy like
sure.
she kind of does that but at the same time it just feels like well we need more movie.
Let me ask you this, because there's this whole thing later on where Casey Meadows is first experience with I I'm just gonna call him Sam Jones because he's Sam Jones to me.
Battle.
Okay,
Battle. His
that
name's
that's
Battle.
a stupid ass name. I'm sorry. I don't care. I don't care where you come from. Battle. All right. No, I'm calling him Sam Jones. Fuck that. So her first experience with Sam Jones was obviously him being drunk and running naked in the park, which I feel like you can't find much trivia in this movie, but if you look up trivia on like IMDb, a lot of the facts are Sam Jones was very perfectly fine, very comfortable running naked in the park for this scene.
And apparently
oh,
they had no permits doing that scene,
I'm
which
not
blows my
I'm not
mind.
surprised. When you're a low budget film, you try and cut corners anywhere you can.
I mean,
Kind of like
it's
in
a
the
film that was I mean, it's a film that was shot in 21 days too. I mean, they kind of had to keep cutting corners as much as
Kind
possible.
of like how the movie Miami Connection had this whole scene on the streets of LA at nighttime, where there's a big gang fight that breaks out, and you see there's nobody on the streets, and you could tell they shot this at 3 a.m. There's no one to catch them or try and get permits from them because they obviously didn't have
Yeah.
permits, and they try and like film this at night. But it's just like sure, yeah, you get away with it, but it's like you could just there's nobody in the background. You're like, wait, is this like a ghost town? Like what the hell? But but no, it reminded me. It's kind of like that, yeah. Where no, it was a thing for the smaller productions to just cut corners wherever they could. It's like, hey, if we don't have to get a damn permit, let's just do it. But anyway, but yeah, no. But then the second encounter was pretty much when he's just sober again, and he's kind of a dick, Like Casey Meadows trying to make conversation with him or something, and then he just like closes the window in the limousine, like he just doesn't want to talk. He's just like, yeah, you're annoying, you're an annoying brat. Like, I don't want to talk to you. So, but they go for some car trouble, and then one thing
Well,
leads to
he says, "Can you drive me out to like it's like on the outskirts. It's like way miles away. Like the car wasn't really intact for that type
and
of
they're gonna
trip. So
overblow the engine, but he's like, listen, you're my chauffeur. You're the chauffeur. I'm paying you. You do what I tell you. And then, of course, the thing blows up anyway, blows out, and the car is stuck. And so they're like walking, trying to find trying to find the nearest payphone or whatever. And Sam Jones slides into a mud pit or something. And it's that
Yeah.
whole thing where she's like, I don't know. I guess I could lend a hand if someone like you needed help, But
All you
he has
need to do is say the magic word.
he has too much he has too much pride to want to ask for help. But those are like the only scenes you really have gotten with them together. And then next thing you know, they manage to stay with these people that are in the woods at some cabin, and they make out and fall in love and everything. And I'm like, okay, I didn't feel like there was the best build up to that. I never exactly bought their romance in the movie.
No, it kind of comes
It,
out of nowhere,
it's
and
very out of nowhere. It's very poorly developed, and then I'm like, well, okay, this is a very fast. I'm like, that happened so fucking fast.
But here's one question I want to ask you. Does this film structurally kind of feels like it's dipping its toe a bit into the soft porn genre?
Uh, house. I don't think. How so? Honestly, okay. If I'm gonna give some input on that, why do you see it that way?
Because it's a very thin story, and every single set piece kind of feels like this could have been written like that should have been the sex scene, only it's a zany comedic scene.
Well, I think part of it is of the times this movie was made. What stuff that's could easily just pass off simply as comedy. Some of it seems a little bit questionable.
Yeah.
But I feel like this also plays into this plays once again to like how uneven this movie is. You got the whole beginning where it sets it up as this endearing kind of movie. You think it could be about a movie about this girl that's kind of lost in her life, and then then she gets this job as a cab driver, or no, sorry, not cab driver, as a limousine driver, and then these people doubt her, and she's got to prove it to them, and it could be like an endearing kind of like light comedy romantic movie, and it feels that way at a bunch of points, but then it decides it wants to be a wacky, weird, trashy comedy. Like some of it feels a little lowbrow, like almost like it clashes with the tone that some of the other scenes in this movie have. Like you feel like there's scenes in this movie that you feel like, okay, there's a bit of a this feels like it's a bit of a comedy, but it's got a bit of class to it, and then you get these scenes where it's like there's no class to it, where it's just like absolutely just like no shame.
I think exactly the point that you're trying to make is really solidified during that part near the end where Sam Jones finally kind of sees the error of his ways, and he politely offers his secretary a raise so she can help out her daughter a little bit more. It's like that's a nice scene in its own way, because at least like a character in this movie has somewhat of an arc. You're like, okay, yay! But then it immediately hard cuts to like Penn and Teller with the, all right, now it's time for the gratuitous nudity. Everybody take off your clothes and I'll let it rain in here. It's like, what the fuck?
Yeah, some sketchy guy trying to hustle an Egyptian ambassador. I'll be honest, I found that scene so annoying the first time I watched it.
Oh, it is aggravating. Penn does not know how to shut the fuck up.
I will say, yeah, you know what? Yeah, second time around, I agree with that. I'm like, you need a bit of air in between what he was saying. Like, I feel like because obviously, like, I could tell this was improvised, no doubt.
Oh, for sure.
But then because you improvise, you just keep saying what comes to mind, and so
it's like you got all this. You gotta trim the fat. You gotta break it down a bit. Yeah. You need breathing room, or you need to trim down this amount of improv, because what does this all mean?
But you know what? Otherwise, in some kind of trashy way, I actually do find that scene fun. I actually found that more entertaining this time around, just because it's just like, well, just like because like I guess Teller I always forget which one's Penn and Teller, but wherever plays
Penn's the pimp and Teller's the
yeah.
ambassador.
So Teller, like he doesn't even talk the entire time. This entire time is
I think that's actually his shtick, just in general. He
yeah,
doesn't talk.
yeah. And then you got like Teller just like trying to like hustle him, and it's just like, and then they end up going to that club where they end up dancing ridiculously, and I think it's kind of entertaining to just be like just see Teller really confused at first, being like, "Who is this man? And why is he doing with my wallet? And why is he taking my watch? You know?" And oh,
Yeah,
he's
yeah.
trying to do this 3 card game here that's like gambling or whatever. And then, but then the next thing you know, they got these like skimpy chicks in the car, and then. But then you see him gradually kind of smile, like he's kind of enjoying this, and it's kind of it's kind of entertaining in a really sleazy, dumb kind of way, I guess. I mean,
I just think at that point it was testing my patience a little too
sure. Oh,
much.
sure. I could use some trimming for sure. I think they could have trimmed a bit and had some like some breathing room here and there in the more so with Penn. But I mean, since this movie was already going for a bit of that sleazy comedy in a bunch of these scenes or set pieces, I mean, this fit in with that, and it's kind of like a guilty pleasure, that whole scene where I'm like, the
The
whole
whole
movie,
movie itself is a bit of a
oh,
guilty pleasure
no, you
in
know
my
what? It is
book.
a guilty pleasure. You know what?
Yeah.
I actually, this movie kind of grew on me. I'm like, you know what? It has a bit of an identity crisis. It doesn't really know where it wants to be. It's all over the place. But because of that, it's also a very interesting specimen of an 80s movie of very much of its time, and it has a lot of charm to it, even though a lot of what it tries to achieve does not really work. Like, I feel like plot wise, I feel like every opportunity they try to make to give some kind of development to this movie just kind of falls flat. Especially
Yeah.
they do that entire whole twist at that end, which can you describe this? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So before you get to that, like I have to actually bring up I mean, I'm actually shocked that they were able to get E.G. Marshall, like actor alumni E.G. Marshall to play Mr. Witherspoon because no, well, not only the fact that like they shot his portion in only 3 days, which is kind of funny. All he did was just sit there. Penn and Teller was shot in just like all their stuff was a 16-hour stretch.
Oh, jeez.
Like that must have been a long day. That would have must have been an exhausting day
Yeah.
just having them improv in the car. But with E.G. Marshall, I was actually confused at first. I'm like, why are you just not going up to Casey and just saying, "Here's the reason why I hired you." So it turns out that in the midst of like she lost her job at the end. Her and Battle fall in love, and it was revealed earlier that Battle and is the son of Mr. Witherspoon, but Casey didn't know about that. So when they go to see him, he's like, "Does this room sort of feel familiar to you?" And she's like, "Oh my God, my mom used to work here, and I used to play in this room when I was a little kid." And then she looks up and she recognizes Battle, like, "Oh my God, I knew you as like when I was 3 and you were probably like 10 or
And
something like that." Like there's an
and
age
they're like
gap.
happy,
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, we were a lot closer than we really thought we were, and they got happy about that, and they're like, let's get married, and then like Mr. Witherspoon's no, no, you can't get married, and why is that, Cody?
Because you guys are siblings.
And then, oh,
Uh-oh,
we've been
we've been
bad.
bad. And the movie should have just ended right there. And I would have been like, this is a 5 out of 5 movie. That is hilarious. But again, because this movie doesn't know how to find its footing, there's like this one worker that's always like,
Like a Scrooge, he's always been just like a total like I mean, a bunch of those older guys were all kind of a bit mean to her, but like he was
this guy was particularly a
this
standout.
guy sounded like feeling like the entire movie he had grudge, and I'm like, why was he such an asshole? And even she was like, why were you like, it's like, you were so mean to me, why was that? And
So it turns out that thankfully, I guess, they're not siblings. This guy, I forget his name. I'm just gonna call him Scrooge. It
yeah.
turns out Scrooge was having an affair with Casey's mom back then, who she thought was with Mr. Witherspoon, and she was gonna have his baby, but it really wasn't. And the reason why he kind of just like abandoned her, because he's like, well, you're gonna have this rich father your whole life. Why would I step in? And of course, straight out of like the most cliched movie ever, she has the line, I didn't care about the money. I just wanted a father.
And I'm like, so wait, so this is you were so this guy, this Scrooge guy was just a dick the entire time because I'm like, because why?
Because he was like, I'm not the rich one. And
But that was his reason for being an absolute dictator this entire time. It doesn't feel that well justified. I guess it was his movie. It was the movie's way of making us just think that, well, okay, if we ever did suspect that one of these guys was the father, which I don't know why, or was a real father, which I don't know why you would think that, but let's just make this guy, this Scrooge guy, just seem like a real asshole, and you think that he's the last guy that would have anything to do with the actual plot of things.
yeah,
So it's almost like that's a little twist in itself. Like, ta-da! This guy that you thought was an asshole was actually being an asshole for a reason, because he's the real father. And I just don't know what. It's just like, okay, cool,
yeah.
whatever.
And then it just ends off kind of like, okay, they get married, and then it freeze frames of them driving away with the just married sign, and I'm like, wow, you can't get any more average than that. Like it's just like, okay, uh, I don't know what I watched, but it certainly was an interesting experience. I do want to talk about one thing, because you're a big '80s music fan. How did you feel about both the score and all the songs in the film that were performed by the Wigs?
So there was songs. Were they all performed by the Wigs? Because I think there was also a song that was performed by the Flesh Tones. Um,
Yeah.
but
Well, there
there.
there were apparently there were 8 credited songs by the Wigs, even if it was like instrumental or anything like that. Like they're actually
Oh,
featured in the
so
film.
they
They're
scored this
they're the
movie.
band. They're performing on stage during when Casey was
So
driving,
yeah, they
catfighting them.
so they were probably like a local band, and they bands always look for that. Like, okay, someone gets us to score their movie. This is gonna be our ticket into.
That is literally the story. David Beard, the writer and director, said, I was out one night at a bar with my date and they were performing, and I said, I like these guys. I want to put them in a movie one
And they're
day.
like, oh my god, this is our big chance. But unfortunately, that movie was My Chauffeur, and that wouldn't have that didn't go anywhere for them. I can obviously imagine, but
They have that song, Fire,
So
Fire.
I never actually heard of any of the bands or songs that were in this movie, but it definitely had that '80s, that rock new wave kind of like danceable, kind of funky kind of sound. That I'm
Yeah.
like, I don't know these bands, but I've heard a lot that has been that's similar to these bands. I'm like, you know what, it was good. I'm like, okay, like you might be able to say that some of them sound like a poor man's version of a better band that you've heard that does the same kind of music, but overall, I mean, it's a fun soundtrack. Like it complements the movie well.
Kudos to the good people at Vinegar Syndrome, who later on put the film on DVD and Blu-ray. In the special features for it, they have a isolated soundtrack, which I thought was great.
Of all the movies out there to have isolated soundtracks, My Chauffeur gets an isolated soundtrack. I mean, that's just so freaking bizarre to me. Like,
Because there's a few tracks in this that the synthesized during like all the kind of sentimental parts, like when Casey was trying to get Battle out of the muddy pit, and when Battle was, giving the secretary a raise. There's that kind of like slower synth. I'm like, this is kind of good. I like this
do
stuff.
you know what do you know what's good about that though is I'm gonna take a stab and say that this movie probably didn't have an official soundtrack release.
It didn't, but I would honestly say the fact that like we have this isolated soundtrack, you can almost like rip it off and then, have it. I mean, I don't want to.
Exact.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you can like cut them up by separate tracks, and now you can have the soundtrack for the first time in that kind of way.
Do you know who the composer was?
I forget who.
It was a guy by the name of Paul Herzog, who would later on do the score for both Bloodsport and Kickboxer.
Wow, I'm not really impressed at all by that. But I
Oh, I thought because you like Bloodsport, or you like all these Jean-Claude Van Damme.
Oh, I
kick
I
fighting
I
movies.
actually have never seen Bloodsport, and I know like
What? I think we saw Bloodsport way back in the day. I've seen it.
I know like some like the scenes like I've seen scenes from it like like even that scene where he does the splits while he's in the forest or something. Jean-Claude Van Damme showing off his you know he's,
It's Jean Claude Van Damme showing off his Jean Claude Van Damme.
he shows off so much Claude that it makes you go Van Dam. That's the best I got. But
Even during that scene that I was complaining about of just Penn running his mouth off improving, having that scene just muted and with the isolated soundtrack, that's a Wings song that was playing that whole time. It was just an instrumental with the funky bass and just like this kind of like cool song that I feel like if I ever had a car and I was driving down the highway, this would be like the perfect track for this.
well, good for you. I guess this isolated score thing was made just for people like you, Cody. Um, but
hopefully there's nobody in the back playing oil baron in the dry wells. Ugh, that's the card game that he was showing the
oh,
ambassador.
what a long name. Is there like a shorter name to call that? How about call it scam? Uh, it's kind of a great time to be alive for discovering old obscure movies these days. Because yeah, you got companies like Vinegar Syndrome that put out movies that you never thought would have made it onto the Blu-ray format, or movies that pretty much no one asked for to ever be re-released. But yet, you know what? There's always there's every film's got its fans. So you know what? They support those niche audiences. So I mean, I'm I'm happy that those exist. Really.
Hmm. Now, I'm of course not going to bother. Usually on the show, I do this thing called Pop Quiz Hot Shots, where I quiz my guest. And of course, you've only seen this movie twice, and there's really not much to really of questions to go into. I'm really not going to go into that. However, I do have like some fun, just like little noteworthy trivia to kind of go over, where it kind of paints a little bit more of a picture because thanks to Vinegar Syndrome, I was able to watch a lot of special features and listen to a bit of the commentary track of the writer and director David Beard. So
Woohoo!
it kind of filled in a bit of like the gaps of this enigma of a film that I've just grew up with that I'm all like I want to know the backstory behind this. So apparently David Beard had a background in theater and theater only. And he wrote the script in like a week. And when he met Deborah Foreman, he knew like this is definitely my main character because he didn't really knew that many people in the Hollywood scene at the time, and he didn't really get that much finance from it other than this production company at the time called Crown International Pictures, which I will get into in a second. And this is kind of I think this is the reason why this movie failed horribly. So apparently, Deborah Foreman and Sam Jones were told to study 1940s comedy films and kind of adapt that to their roles. And I went, oh, okay, yeah, I can see the bringing up baby
The
kind
fast
of.
talk, like she kind of falls into that fast talking routine at times,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
remember pretty much right at the beginning of the movie, she's like talking about why she's late, and she's like, oh, I partied really hard last night, and then my dog had a hangover, and then he was sick from drinking all his beer, and then I gave him an Alka Seltzer, and but yeah, no, like I could tell he was going for that at parts.
yeah, yeah. And actually, Deborah Foreman, she bought all of those crazy outfits she was wearing from a thrift shop.
Oh yeah.
Like it wasn't even a costume designer's choice. It was just she went out and was like, I'm grabbing all this stuff and I'm gonna keep
Are
it
you
as
are you
well.
talking about even the uniform she ends up picking for limo driving?
Not the limo, not those outfits.
Oh,
More the outfits
like
just on her
like
downtime when
she
she
wears
was
that
like,
cap and that suit jacket. Oh, I think that is an absolute outstanding outfit. I'm like, oh my god, that's adorable.
yeah,
That is super new. It's super like a mix of like classic and new and like classic old fashioned and new wave. And then she like steps out and looks at the one Scrooge guy, and she's like, "Kiss me, stupid." I'm like, oh my god, that would knock me right off my feet.
here's something that won't knock you right off your feet. There was an apparent rape scene that in this film that was cut because everybody felt like this does not match the tone at all. Apparently, it was a scene where she was driving two people in the car, and then like a couple in the back seat start to get like a little frisky, but then the guy takes it really too far, and she was trying to push him back, and then she pulls over the car, Casey pulls over the limo, and then the argument breaks out into the street where he's trying to like strip her, but he like inexplicably drops his gun, and Casey picks it up and is trying to handle it, like get away from her and all that stuff. And they cut it and they just kind of like burned that scene. They only talk about it now, but well, no, actually, it was just Deborah Foreman was saying, "I'm so happy they did cut that out because it was actually uncomfortable filming it, and it was actually uncomfortable watching it afterwards."
Oh my god. Honestly, considering the tone that the film almost feel kind of goes towards at times, the sleazier aspects, that does feel like it would have been like that does feel like it would have been in tone with like it fits in with the movie, but at the same time it's like at the same time it would have been like taking it a step too far.
Way too far, yeah.
Like, like what is it like, you gotta remember what kind of movie you're making.
And then yeah, after a 21-day shoot, they put it into post and they got this movie. It was filmed in 1985 and didn't come out till like a whopping year later in 1986. And it came number one in the box office, but apparently Crown International Pictures lied about the box office results, saying that it beat Steven Spielberg's The Color Purple at the time. And Spielberg and his lawyers cracked down and investigated and was like, no, 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 this is not what it is. And they sued the company.
That's so stupid. Oh my god.
I don't know if it was that move that officially bankrupted them, but it certainly didn't paint a good picture on
Wait,
the company's
did
face.
Spielberg do that, or just the production company itself?
This is according to Deborah Foreman. She just kind of may have paraphrased it and said Spielberg and his lawyers, or they just said they
Because I'm
went
like, did
after
you really need to
the
go that
makers.
far to go pick on a little film that's just trying to create some buzz? Give the little film a break.
But another thing that may have also hurt the film is that for even during writing the script and also shooting, the film was actually under the name A Class Act.
Mm-hmm.
And at the very last minute, and there are trailers and TV spots out there for the film of just My Chauffeur, but apparently those were whipped up right at the last minute, and people didn't know knew what this movie was because they were already probably reading in the tabloids at the time that there was a film coming out with Sam Jones and all that called A Class Act, and the fact that like this movie comes in out of nowhere in the theater called My Chauffeur, they're like, what? What's this? And then no one saw it.
Uh,
And yeah, that kind of that lawsuit that the studio went through, it hurt the film's image. And Deborah Foreman was supposed to she was booked to be on like Letterman and Johnny Carson at the time, and like I think there was a third talk show host. All of them got canceled.
oh, that sucks.
Yeah, she was going to be on there, and it would have been great. It would have been great to see like old footage, like if people would have like recorded that
Yeah,
back then.
that's not fair to her. I think she deserves a lot better.
Yeah, and the film sort of faded from existence until people like my mom and her college roommates at the time, before I was even born, they were all just stoned off their minds and drunk off their minds way back in the day, and they just discovered this film and they used to just kill themselves laughing so hard. And for Mother's Day last year, I gave my mom My Chauffeur on the Blu-ray and DVD, and she got one of her old roommates to come over last year,
Oh yeah.
and it was kind of like coming full circle where they were watching it again, and I joined them, and it was pretty funny watching it with them actually. So that's this very obscured film called My Chauffeur.
For all the flaws it has, it's actually it's a fun time capsule of a movie. I'd say the faults itself also make it charming and also an interesting watch. You get a lot of those movies
Yeah,
where they try to genuinely try to be like something good, and they either end up being really boring and they fall flat. And like, there's a lot of movies that are like from that era that's like it's like no one saw these, and you see these movies years later, and you're like, yeah, I could see why this has been buried in the past. But My Chauffeur is one of those movies it's got enough to it that I'm like, I don't think this deserves to be buried anymore. I think as far as niche underground 80s movies go. This is a fun little one.
It's uneven. It's very uneven. You got to go into it with the right
Yeah.
mindset. I think Deborah Foreman carries the film
Ab-
throughout the whole time.
Absolutely.
Even her character, even though it is a bit like underwritten but her charisma kind of shines through. There's some like a few parts of like charm in it. Like do you remember that one scene where she was hearing like that younger couple arguing where he's in law school and he can't afford a car, and then she just kind of like pulls in out of nowhere and says, "Oh, your uncle hired me to pick you guys up," and then where they're just like, "Thank you so much. This is amazing."
Yeah,
It kind
no,
of
that
like
was a great moment.
it kind of defines her as a character where she's like sweet and loving even just to like the just random people,
Yeah.
and then she can also give people their comeuppance, like the scene where
The guy tries to
the
break
guy
into her
tries the
limo.
guy tries to break into the car, and it has the most amazing security that every car should have, of just locking the guy in the car and just smother it all with smoke and choke them to death.
I I'm sure that was all hooked up in the car and not just some fog machine blowing smoke out of the car, and also some cassette machine with a speaker saying you're in violation, you're breaking into this car or whatever. I can totally believe that all of that was actually built into that car. Really.
However, be wary that there's a lot of scenes that feel very misogynist, and you just kind of go into it with the right kind of mindset where it's like that was probably the times and they were probably doing it in this sort of exaggerated way, even though that the jokes don't come together all in.
There's some fun when Casey Meadows like just steps into the room all the men hang out, and then they're like you can't step in, this is the men's room, and it's like, and she's like, it's like, oh, it's a men's room, well, you don't have anything that I haven't seen before. If there's something I haven't seen before, I'll throw a rock at it. And then the guy stands up and he's like, you won't be throwing rocks at my John Thomas.
Yeah, no, there's a few
or
parts where
even
you're
or
like,
even that scene
okay.
where they're talking about well, I mean, it gets misogynist or sexist to a extent where they're like, oh, like, what are you afraid of? Like, why are you afraid of having this girl around? Like, what are you afraid that she's gonna flash her tits or something? And then they go on a really stupid talk about tits and everything, and be like, I haven't seen a good tit in 100 years, and the guy's like, oh, shut up! All you can talk about now is nipples, and they're like, we didn't say anything about nipples. We were talking about full tit. it's, it's just like you have to laugh.
A favorite quote that my mom and I always say to each other when it's a hot day, we just go, my, it's very hot outside. Thank God it's not sticky. I sure hate it when it's sticky."
Oh right, yeah, yeah.
uh,
So yeah, my chauffeur is a fun film. Really, for what it is, it's fun.
I can make a humble argument that it is probably the most underrated, cheeky, dated 80s comedy ever made.
I would usually step in and say that there's probably some other film from the 80s I know that's within the same genre that I'm like, oh, my chauffeur doesn't hold a candle to this, but I can't think of anything at the moment, so I will go with you on that one, Cody.
Well, that takes us to the end. Thank you so much, Troy. This was a privilege to have you on here.
This was an interesting film to talk about first time. Definitely a movie you had more history with than I do, but it was also like one of those movies when I didn't think very much of it at first, and now that I revisited it, I'm glad I revisited it. It was a lot of fun, and it reminds me of exactly why I like the '80s stuff.
That's why I thought it'd be perfect for you, because there's already been enough reviews for like all the great 80s films. Why don't we just bring some light to something that not a lot of people talk about and let the legacy of My Chauffeur carry on, of what little that it has. And of course, Troy, I would love to have you back on the show to talk about a film that we either equally love or equally hate.
Okay, yeah, sure. You know what, Cody? It's your podcast. I will roll with whatever you say. Whatever you say, Jack. You're the master race.
Well, everybody who's listening, subscribe to So to Speak. Check out their content there. Drop a like, drop a comment, and I'll see you on the next one. Goodbye, babe. It is babe, isn't it?
What a funny. You made it funny.